guys, I decided to make another video for anyone who missed class this week, week 6. Our task this week was to start to reflect more on the rhetorical triangle and to apply that rhetorical triangle and rhetorical framework to the first official legit reading for our class, which is Henry David Thoreau's Civil Disobedience. Now this is a really large work, and so it's somewhat complicated to navigate. So I just want to point that out to anyone who missed class, or even if you were in class, to remind you that Henry David Thoreau's writing comes from a very strong philosophical framework, and so his ideas are highly logical and rather complex. And also, in some ways, he repeats himself but says it with a difference, which is kind of one of the moves that we discuss in They Say, I Say, your textbook. So again, if you missed class this week, week 6, what we did in class was we used reading and writing strategies to go deeper into a reading and apply the rhetorical framework and the rhetorical triangle. Remember, we have the rhetorical triangle, and then within that triangle, we have the rhetorical framework. The framework is a specific things to look at when you're trying to understand the how of a piece of writing. Many of you commented online, you noticed in the rhetorical framework handout and even in the rhetorical triangle handout that the word how is used a lot. And so I just want you to keep the word how in your head when you're looking at a piece of writing. Anytime you're looking at a piece of writing this semester, whether it's a short reading or a longer reading or your textbook, you're not just looking at what they say, but how they deliver the message. Remember, this is rhetoric. Looking at the craft of the speaker, looking at the craft of the writer through their techniques. Right? This is how we become great writers, is we slow down and we study the mind of the writers that we're looking at. And so our first writer is Henry David Thoreau. So I'm just going to click on the discussion for week 6. And so what we did in class, just to back up, this is specifically the Tuesday class. What we did in class was we used several strategies to slowly start to absorb the ideas of Henry David Thoreau, but really to start to absorb the larger conversation of what justice is. And so our packet that I handed out, that's also online on the homepage, is the justice packet, right? So it says justice on it. So we actually started the class by reading over the quotes on the top left-hand side of the page, different viewpoints from Voltaire to Hammurabi to Michel Foucault to Frederick Douglass, different viewpoints on what is justice, different definitions of justice or lenses for understanding justice. Remember, anytime you talk about justice, this is a huge concept, right? It's a philosophical concept, an ideology, a way of thinking that can be filtered through different lenses. And a good example of this is law enforcement. What is law enforcement's definition of justice? And how is that definition different than maybe a sociological view of justice or even a psychological view of justice? So all very different definitions of justice. So that's how we started off the class, was looking at the concept of justice, reading over the introduction from this handout that I made. Remember, the handout comes from the book A World of Ideas, compilations of readings that revolve around similar themes. So the ones that we're looking at are Henry David Thoreau's Civil Disobedience, Martin Luther King's Letter from Birmingham Jail, and then lastly for us, Martha C. Nussbaum's Human Capabilities. Right, those are the three, along with Natalie Goldberg, that we're going to be kind of looking at and analyzing rhetoric through. Remember, for essay number 2, the rhetorical analysis, you get to choose one of these authors, unless you're very ambitious and you want to do a cross-comparison, comparative analysis of the rhetoric of 2 of them. So again, what we did in class was we read over this beginning packet. It's, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4 pages. Remember this, I'm referring to the justice packet. So we read over the first 4 pages to kind of situate ourselves in this conversation of justice. That entire section goes over several people from Plato to Aristotle to Thomas Hobbes. And so what we did was we read over it and we practiced our first skill, which was annotation. So anytime you read something, you're going to be annotating. You're going to get out your highlighter, you're going to get out your pen, you're going to get out your dictionary, you're going to start annotating. Annotating is circling words or phrases or underlining lines that stand out to you. Oftentimes in the discussions, I'm going to ask you to find the golden line. And what I'm asking you to do is find a line that resonates with you. right? There's a reason why when you read something, it stirs you. And so we get to go deeper into why it stirs us later. But during the annotating of a text, that first contact, that first interaction of reading it, that's a flash of our first experience with it. So the annotation will reflect that. So oftentimes when I'm annotating, what I'm doing in the margins, specifically in this section, is I'm writing a few little notes about each of the thinkers that Jacobus goes over. Remember, this comes from a book, The World of Ideas, and the editor is Lee Jacobus. And within that, it's an anthology, so we have all these different scholars and intellectuals. But in this introductory section, they present in each paragraph roughly a new thinker, another thinker in the lineage, in the discussion on the philosophy of justice. So we start off here with Plato, then we jump to Aristotle, we go on to Thomas Hobbes, then we go on to Cicero, and then we hit Henry David Thoreau, and that's the person that we're starting with this semester by reading his piece. Then it goes on to a female, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and her piece on justice in regards to the exclusion of women. And then we go on to Martin Luther King Jr. Again, that's one of our scholars that we're going to be looking at the rhetoric of. And then next is John Rawls and his book on theory of justice. And then the last one here mentioned is Martha C. Nussbaum, and she is, according to this, one of the most prominent modern legal scholars, and she looks at, she builds on Rawls' idea of the primary goods. So again, the introductory section of this entire packet, which is on your homepage if you didn't get one and you missed it in class, is just overviewing and going over the thinkers in this discussion on justice. So they are building on one another's ideas. And if you look back at They Say, I Say, you remember many of you noted on the online discussions that in order to frame your ideas, they have to be in relation to what someone else has already said. So we have a perfect example here with this introduction of a lineage of a conversation of people building on one another's ideas. That's how great thinking happens. We don't think in isolation. We think in response to other people's ideas, ideas that existed before we were ever born, right? And so we go back all the way. If you look at Plato, this is 428 to 347 BC. So this is a really long time ago. These are ideas that have lasted over time, over space. Why? Why are they so significant? They're important. There's a lot of gold there for us to bring back. And so again, I just want to remind you about what we did in class in case you missed it, or in case you missed it while you were in class, that we're looking at the lineage of the philosophy of justice, theories and ideas on justice, what it means. Many of these thinkers are looking at justice in the context of the individual. What is justice to the individual? And also, what is justice to the individual within a society? And so many of the writers talk about within the republic, within the democracy, within the state, right? And so you look at the individual versus the collective, right? And how justice plays out in those arenas. So this introductory part is just that. So what we did in class after we looked at the introduction was we took the introduction and we clustered it, and we actually looked at it. We tried to create a visual of what that lineage looked like. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to bust out my journal here. Let me find out the spot that we were looking at. So I use a lot of clusters, and I'm just going to show you a few, and they're totally cheesy. If I had an actual projector, I would show you, but I'm just going to try and hold this up to the camera. So these are clusters, right? I'm reading the 4 agreements with my VO2 class, and so we're looking at the smoky mirror, and then we're also looking at domestication and the dream of the planet. So these are clusters that I made in response with the class to those chapters. So a cluster is a visual. You've done it before, we've done it in class, but this is an additional reminder. So many times when we're writing, we don't really know where to start. And so when I start to try and generate ideas, I'll first begin with brainstorming and clustering. Clustering for me is a chance to just let loose and to draw on the ideas that are already in my head, or even look at a text and pull ideas from that text. So again, what we did in class was we looked at the theories or the views of justice, and we clustered them. So you can see here, we're kind of going in a circle. We're looking at all the different viewpoints. We have Martin Luther King, we have Martha Nussbaum, we have Plato, Aristotle. And so what we did was we just looked at our reading, which we had annotated, and we pulled ideas from the reading. So again, this is going to save you time later when you go back to do your rhetorical analysis, because you've already started, harvesting those seeds, planting those seeds, and then really harvesting what you've planted, which is ideas, right? Ideas take time to grow. It's like Natalie Goldberg compares ideas in writing to a compost pile, right? You throw eggshells, you throw leftover oatmeal, you throw, leftover smoothie in your compost pile, and over time it sits there, it marinates, and then from it comes really rich soil that you can use for planting. So ideas work the same way. They take time to germinate and grow, right? And so clustering is a way to do that. So that's what we did in class, was a cluster. And we didn't spend a lot of time doing this. We just let it kind of come out naturally and quickly, right? Great writing doesn't have to necessarily, you don't have to spend an hour on a cluster. You can just bust out the ideas and get them out on paper so that they're no longer rolling around in your head. That's what your journal is for. Remember, the journals are graded at the end of the semester, and so I'm looking at your thinking. I'm looking at what was going on in your mind and how did you capture that in writing. That's my way of evaluating what you've learned, what you've absorbed, and also your note-taking skills. I'm looking at your skill set. Are you leaving the class with a stronger reading and writing skill set than you came in with? And hopefully, definitely, the answer is yes, right? You have these skills you can take away and apply them to any reading that you do. So again, the next thing that we did in class was we jumped into the Thoreau reading. And what we did was we actually just went to the discussion online. We clicked on the YouTube video, which I also have in my other video, and we began the reading.
On the Duty of Civil Disobedience by Henry David Thoreau.
Right, and so we were able to listen to it. We went very, very slowly just for the first couple paragraphs. We listened to a paragraph, we annotated it, then we paused it, and we went back and talked about, okay, what is Thoreau doing in this section? How is he crafting his argument? So we used our natural annotations to come up with ideas about his craft, about his rhetoric. So remember, we're looking specifically at that rhetorical triangle, and then we're taking that triangle and we're putting it right on top of Thoreau's writing to ask the question, how is he crafting his argument? What is he doing? So we noted lots of things, even just in that first paragraph. He is making a claim. He's making an argument. Let me just grab it so I can double check and be reminded of what he's actually doing in that paragraph. He has a reference to the quote that he's very well known for, which is, that government is best which governs least. And then he keeps talking and he says that government is best which governs not at all, right? And so a lot of people, when they hear that, they think, oh my gosh, anarchy, right? But if you look at the footnote, you can see that these ideas come in response to the Mexican War, which was happening and which was very unpopular in New England, and also the political turmoil that was happening. So Thoreau's argument isn't we shouldn't have a government. Thoreau's argument, just to summarize it quickly, is that we should have a better government. We should expect more from our government because the government is us. The leaders that we have placed in government are the people. And so, again, we're looking at his rhetoric. We have that quote that he mentions. You see the footnote and you can see that that quote comes from something else. Whenever you see reference to something, to another philosopher or thinker or rapper or anyone that someone is using to share an idea, we know it's the rhetorical framework. We know that it's an authority reference, right? And so maybe he's using John L. O'Sullivan and the Tao Te Ching and Thomas Jefferson, whose ideas align with that idea about being critical of government. Maybe he's using those to strengthen his argument. And so we can attach that to the rhetorical triangle and say maybe that's part of his ethos, is he's drawing on that authority. Or maybe it's part of his logic. Maybe he's using logos in that way, right? You can argue whatever you want, but you have to support it with the actual text. So again, if you miss class, that's what happened in class. We went very slowly over some of the strategies. After we listened for quite a bit of Thoreau, several pages, we stopped and we did a free write for 10 minutes, just reflecting on all the things that had happened within the reading and that were kind of popping in our heads that we wanted to get out immediately. Remember, with the free write, that's writing practice. So the strategies that we practiced in class were annotating the text, engaging with the text, highlighting, underlining, making reference to vocabularies that we can look up later. We also used clustering, which is that brainstorming technique. Super easy, super good. By far one of the best techniques when you're trying to draw up ideas from your mind. You'll find stuff that you didn't even know was there. And then also the last one, which is free writing. So those are the 3 techniques that we practiced in class. I know that the Thursday class is different, but I'm going to post this for you guys as well in case you didn't experience that. That way you can perhaps benefit from the information. I hope that you guys have a great Valentine's Day if you watch this on Valentine's Day. If not, I still hope you have a really great Valentine's Day. And if you have any questions, make sure that you're posting them in the discussion board. Again, I'm just going to